Well, good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I want to say that we're very, very honored today on this historic inaugural day of 2021 to sit down this afternoon with the incoming chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio. Before we get to that, I do want to say, Senator, I'm bringing you greetings from our chair, Pittsburgh native Deb Cafaro, our incoming chair, from Boston, John Fish, of course, our board of directors and members from across the country, but in particular, our Ohio members. So they send their greetings to you, sir. By way of background, Senator Brown is the senior senator from the great state of Ohio. Prior to being elected to the Senate in 2006, he was a member of the House from 1993 to 2007. He was reelected in 2012 and again in 2018 to the Senate. Previously, he was Secretary of State in Ohio and started his political career in the Ohio State House after graduating from Yale in 1974. As I mentioned, Senator Brown is the incoming chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, three words that mean a lot to our industry. And he's very, very critical on all those issues. But he also serves on the Senate Finance Committee, the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, and the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'd also just background, Senator Brown throughout his career has focused his work primarily on providing greater opportunities for all Americans. He's given voice to millions of workers, minorities, and in fact, the Washington Post once described him as perhaps the most class-conscious Democrat in Washington in a very positive way. First of all, Senator, welcome you. I also want to express my sincere appreciation to you and your colleagues for what you did in the last year regarding your efforts surrounding the pandemic and helping people who lost their jobs and their businesses and so forth. Certainly, as you know, throughout this past year, we've tried to be positive and be helpful to provide assistance to those individuals who lost their jobs and those businesses. We value your discussions with you very, very much. I guess I just want to also say that personally, I appreciate and always have appreciated what you have said and commented that you wanted to restore what you called the dignity of American workers. And in particular, that's important in these challenging times. And we, again, want to be a partner with you. It's troubling. Nobody has to tell you the troubles that we've seen. We've all been stunned by the health crisis from the pandemic, stunned by the economic crisis from the pandemic, stunned by the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the social unrest and outcry that came about from that, and most recently by the violence that we witnessed at the US Capitol just 2 weeks ago. It's startling that it was only so recent. And I guess maybe we could start. We'll get into your priorities on the committee, sir, and we'll get into a few things that are of importance to our industry. But I think for the overall country and our citizens, what are your thoughts about the state of our country and what happened today with the inaugural and where we're going from here, sir? And thank you for being with us very much.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you for the long relationship we've had from your stories about growing up in South Dakota to the modern day. So thank you for that. And thanks to Chair Cafaro. I met a number of you, including Jeff, whom I knew, and Chair Cafaro, who lives really not far from me, at this event in person, obviously in 2019. And thank you for that. Thank you especially. Not a lot of organizations around the country didn't do this, but what the Real Estate Roundtable did, coming together to condemn the recent insurrection at the Capitol, voicing your support for free and fair elections that are the hallmark of democracy. You spoke out against those who played to the myth that the elections weren't what they were, perhaps the best run elections in our history, that there was just no question that that's who we are as a democracy, or who we should be. So thank you as an organization, what you did that way. We've seen, and the work that so many of you have done during the pandemic, we've seen in large part because of the president's lack of leadership, that 400,000 as of today, the day of a new president, 400,000 people have died. And we know that this pandemic has been the great revealer. It's revealed structural racism with the deaths, as you said, of Mr. Floyd and Ms. Taylor and others. It's revealed more class differences, wealth inequality, and it's revealed the work that we all have to do in the area of climate change. So thank you for that. And I would add that prior to the actually doing this more formalized interview, Ms. Reed and Jeff and I were talking about the increased diversity and your commitment as an organization to diversity sort of across the board and how important that is. A couple other comments about, today was, I made no doubt that I was very, very strongly supportive of Joe Biden for president. I think, though, what's happened in the last month really shows the country is dealing much better than we had with these divisions. Joe Biden spent his whole career seeking bipartisanship and working to bring people together. I know that's what he's going to try to do now. And we need to think bigger to deliver real results that make a difference in people's lives. We've seen the people paying the greatest price for this pandemic are people of color in much higher numbers than people that look like Jeff and me. And we need to be increasingly aware of that. And we need to find a way with the president's rescue plan to not defeat the virus, most importantly, and get the vaccine program on its feet. It's not been rolled out very effectively by President Trump. I think President Biden knows what he needs to do, rely on the scientists and the doctors and the CDC and the public health workers. And I think he knows what we need to do in housing. And I appreciate, and I'll move on to the next question, but I appreciate what you have done as an organization fighting for emergency rental assistance. We got $25 billion in the last package. That wasn't enough. We had asked Speaker Leader McConnell for most of the last year, from March when we passed the first bill, really until December, when finally he relented and said, let's do something big, relatively big, and we got the $25 billion. President Biden is pushing for more, as I've lobbied him to push for more. We also need to support funding for local communities to prevent layoffs, and we know what will happen there. And the last thing I'll mention is I noticed the Wall Street Journal all of a sudden, and some politicians all of a sudden, are talking about how bad what the deficit means and how bad it is for our country. They weren't saying that when President Trump was adding to the deficit, but put that aside. I look at this coronavirus as the way that Bill Spriggs, a economist at the chief of the head of the economics department at Howard, the school from which the new vice president graduated, saying that we didn't ask during World War II, can we afford to win this war? We didn't ask before D-Day, do we have the money to do this? We did what we needed to do. That's the way we need, particularly with low interest rates. I was listening to Janet Yellen yesterday, the Secretary of Treasury designee, who probably will be confirmed by the time you actually post this interview by Saturday or Sunday or Monday. And she just said that this is with low interest rates and what this will cost our economy if we don't end this virus, deal with this virus with getting the vaccinations out and spending what we have to do it. If we don't, you're going to have more people unable to pay the rent and do all the things, small businesses and others. So this is just the most important thing we need to do is get this coronavirus behind us and then go back and rebuild this economy. But thank you for your role in doing it, all of you at the roundtable.
Appreciate your comments very, very much. On the rental issue, well, maybe before we do that, let's just ask one more, because I'm sure that on everybody's mind is just, today was the inauguration. The city was buttoned up pretty secure. Let's just put it that way. And there wasn't any violence, thank God. How do you feel going forward, and how do we address what is clearly, whether it's white supremacy or whatever we want to call this disease and sickness and madness that is out there? Do you have any thoughts? We didn't talk about this before, but you have any idea how we can get over this? Obviously, one of the major voices and instigators does not have a megaphone right now, but this is deep-seated, it seems like, and we're all concerned about it, sir.
Yeah, and it's always been there in our society. There's always racism. There's always white supremacists. There's always anti-Semitism. It became a terrible verb, perhaps popularized by the far right in political office. And it's when President Trump incites, and President Trump says in Charlottesville early in his presidency, there are good people on both sides, when people were marching saying the Jews will not, I forget exactly why they said it, but the terrible anti-Semitism, terrible racism, the president basically said it's okay, there are good people there. That kind of rhetoric, but the problem was not just the president. It was Fox News, it was Limbaugh, it was social media, and it was dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of enablers in the Congress who didn't say boo. I sit right on the edge of on the aisle in the Senate, right across 5 feet away. The Republicans sit, and so we sit party on each side, which maybe isn't the best way to do it. That's how we've always done it. And I just watched up close during impeachment where clearly Republican members were afraid of this president. They were afraid the president would tweet out something and give them a bad name by a nickname they didn't like, or would have somebody run against them in the primary. And I think two things have to happen. One, we need to make the people accountable. The Senator Cruz and Senator Hawley and President Trump, make them accountable for what they did. I know you as an organization said you're not giving money, campaign money, and many companies have started to do that to those who really voted to say these election results weren't legitimate. I think that's one thing. We make them accountable, whether it's the impeachment vote or whether it's other kinds of things like you're doing. The second thing is those who were part of this, the inciters, and those who committed violent and illegal acts at the Capitol need to be held accountable. There's an article on the front page of the Cleveland Plain Dealer this week that 2 people from Ohio, a 50-year-old man and a 38-year-old woman, have faced federal charges for what they did at the Capitol, and they could serve 40 years, up to 40 years in prison. Probably won't be that long, but I think that if law enforcement does what it needs to do, if politicians are held accountable by all of you as businesses and individually, I know a lot of people on this call that are watching this are pretty politically active, financially and otherwise, and withhold your support from those people who have done this kind of damage to democracy. Yeah. I think that more than anything will get people to sit back and say, okay, we've got to recalculate. We can never encourage violence again, no matter what your politics are, no matter who you are.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning our statement on political support. We definitely felt those members who voted a particular way a few weeks ago were voting not necessarily for fair elections, but were voting to undermine elections.
Well, it was remarkable. If I could say, it was remarkable after coming back. After we saw the vice president, we saw the sergeant arms come in the middle of a session. We knew none of this was going on outside with the violence because we were in this room, listening to debate. When the sergeant arms took the vice president, ushered him out of the room, 2 minutes later, maybe 3 minutes later, they just stopped everything and shut the doors. And then half an hour later, we were all ushered quickly into another room altogether. That all happened. Then we saw all this footage on CNN or Fox or whatever from this room we were in. We saw the footage on TV. And then we all go back, and there were still 8 or 9 senators who voted saying these election results weren't true, when it's clear that the president's inciting language, coupled with the fact that a whole bunch of senators and congressmen didn't dispute what the president was saying, didn't look into the camera the way Mitt Romney did and say, the president's not telling the truth, this was an honest election. So millions of people followed, and that's how we ended up. That's what was really remarkable, to watch those senators vote that way, and 130 House members vote that way after the attack on the Capitol. That was the most disturbing thing. That was the most disturbing thing that I saw within the Congress. I mean, obviously the violence and killing a police officer was more disturbing, but in terms of what I saw internally.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to believe. And we have doubled down on our statement basically by saying, we're not interested in supporting anyone who's not interested in working in a bipartisan fashion. So Democrats, there are some Democrats that we know who are rather rhetorically flourish. Obviously, they're not inciting violence, but we're interested in helping people find bipartisan solutions, or at least supporting people who want to find bipartisan solutions. and you're one of those. And I think if everybody just starts to think in those terms, it would be a much more healthy debate. And certainly the new president, I think, is familiar with the working so much of Congress that I'm very optimistic that he'll bring a fresh tone and a new look at this, and we're hopeful. You mentioned the 25 billion rental assistance. Today, one of the first executive orders that the president signed, by the way, was to extend the moratorium on evictions. And obviously there are people who are hurting, and we know, I don't know of any building owner who actually wants to throw anybody out because they are hurting from this. But the extension of the moratorium is a difficult thing because those assistance is needed, but it obviously does create a problem for them. At some point, the rent has to be paid, and at some point, the owner has to meet his obligations to his employees and state and local. And so as we get into this, we hope, we can figure out a way to balance those concerns, because over time it will be injurious to not only the building owner, but cities and states and the people that work for these building owners and so forth.
I think we all, I'm supportive of the moratorium. I'm also supportive of moratoria around the country on water and electricity shutoffs. It's just what we need to do as a society like this, but you don't do that without emergency rental assistance. And I know many on this call aren't wild about the CDC rule and the fact that this president extended what the last president had done. But you're going to see with this president real dollars for emergency rental assistance. There was first the 25 billion that a lame duck Senate did finally, that the House had already done, and you're going to see more of that now. And you're going to see help for local government, so that will help with water shutoff and all that, and electricity shutoff, and those that are public entities. But I just don't. We all recognize that this moratorium is people owe 6 months, 7 months, 8 months of rent. We also know that there are people like you that own these apartment buildings and these rental units. And there are lots of mom and pop operations that might own 2 or 3 rental units. I know of some in duplexes in the city of Cleveland where the retired couple lives in one half and is renting in the other, and the person lost their job, and the retired couple has trouble with the mortgage or has trouble just living because that was part of their income. So that's all part of this. And it tells me a couple things on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. It means we need to get much more serious about working with all of you to build more units. It also means we've got to do things on the income side. Many of you have heard the statistic that prior to the pandemic, a quarter of renters in this country paid at least half their income in rent and utilities. And one thing happens in their life: their car breaks down, their child gets sick, they get a minor workplace injury and miss work for a week or two, and they're facing up against eviction because they simply get far behind when that one thing happens. So that's why I pay so much attention to a higher minimum wage, to the overtime rule, which affects 5 million Americans that are working 50 or 60 hours a week and aren't paid extra for that are moderate or low income. All of those things we need to look at in job creation and being creative with transportation and building units and building apartment buildings and doing what you all know how to do. But we've got to deal with what's happened because of the pandemic in people's lives. We've got to deal with finding ways of keeping them in their homes and being able to pay the back rent and do that, because to evict somebody in the middle of a pandemic in the middle of the winter is not what anybody wants to do, clearly.
And this situation over the last year has magnified or amplified or accelerated so many trends, whether they're lack of opportunity trends or inequality trends or housing shortage trends or whatever. In the retail business, we have issues there between brick and mortar and e-commerce and so forth. It's accelerated so many things, but these are real problems, and we definitely want to help find. You mentioned housing, build more units. We're all in on this. We do want to make sure that the balance is there in terms of a lot of these things are local problems in terms of permitting or local community groups that don't want developments in their area that are housing. And all of this is interrelated, but we pledge to you to be an honest, forthright partner.
Well, it's good. I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. My dogs are too loud. Let me close the door. Yeah, we all have our challenges during this. Yeah, and I want to figure out when you people on this call. I mean, most of you think big. I mean, you're builders. You know when President Biden says "building back better," what that means and how you contribute to it. And this committee that I now chair, that I've been on since my 14 years in the Senate, that Jeff mentioned. It's called Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. This committee spent frankly, too much time on banking and not enough on housing. And my pledge is the word housing is going to become much more prominent in this committee's jurisdiction and its work product. And I really count on people like you to help me do that, because we need to be creative. We build housing we help to build housing, stimulate housing near bus stops or near subway stops in bigger cities. So when people, and we know we need to modernize bus fleets. We need to do a lot of things so people can get their health care and get to their job more easily than they have, which affects their housing. And everything and so much in life depends on housing, whether your child gets opportunity, whether there's good food, nutritious food in a store nearby, where you can get your health care, all those kinds of things. And we're simply, we know people that don't have affordable, accessible housing. They don't live as long. I mean, we know we have higher infant mortality, maternal mortality, all those things. And that's my motivation here, is working with you to figure out how to build more affordable units, how we can work together to do that. And that's really my pitch to you. And I know you want to do it.
We're in sync with you on that. And you mentioned bus stops and other things. And it's kind of I think you are probably using that as a stand-in for infrastructure improvements in general that we need. And
right.
It's that, and it's access to broadband for everybody, because people who do not have this kind of access, their educational opportunities and growth and so forth. And again, we can have beautiful hotels, beautiful buildings. If you can't get to them, if the community is not educated, if it's not safe, it's not a great project. And so we understand the connectivity. State and local, I also want to put in a word to you, not that you need to hear this, but if we don't get our cities stabilized and in a position to contribute to helping people and provide the services that people need, if we don't get these cities straightened out, we have a bigger problem, and we'll never get the economy and jobs and so forth going. And you know this, I just want to underscore it and let you know that we are very supportive of whatever you can do to stabilize cities who are, again, accelerated some of their own problems by their own doing, I suppose people could say, but whatever the reason, they're in this situation now, and we need to provide assistance to them.
That's exactly right. So thanks for giving me some time to talk today. And as I said, my pledge is to find creative ways to work together. So I want your businesses to do well. I want people to have good, clean, accessible, affordable places to live, and we can do both. So that's
the only thing I will close with. I gave you what I thought was a pretty nice introduction. The way, in my terms, I'm usually not that. But I left out one very important thing. The senator is a great author, and I would commend his books. If anyone can make a book from the perspective of a desk interesting, he's a great writer, and you are, sir. And thank you so much for your time. And we wish you well. We wish you best of luck, and we'll stand with you to try and get this country back stable and growing for everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Thank you. And all of you, Ms. Cafaro, all of you. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.